The Willow Creek Ranch has been my sanctuary since before I could walk. My grandfather purchased these 200 acres back in 1937, during the tail end of the Great Depression when land was cheap and dreams were expensive. He built the main house with his own hands, the same hands that taught me how to mend fences and deliver calves when I was just a boy. Every morning for the past 15 years since inheriting this place, I have risen with the sun, pulled on my boots, and stepped out onto the porch to breathe in the same view that has greeted 3 generations of my family. The old oak tree by the east pasture still bears the tire swing my father hung for me. The barn, though weathered and patched in places, stands strong against the elements just as it has for decades. My daily routine varies little from season to season. Feed the livestock, check the fences, maintain the equipment, tend to whatever needs arise. There is comfort in these rhythms, a deep satisfaction in work that connects you directly to the land beneath your feet and the animals that depend on you. My grandfather always said that a ranch is not just property, it is a living history. Every fence post tells a story. The groove worn into the wooden handle of the water pump from thousands of strokes. The initials carved into the barn door frame marking the heights of children who now have children of their own. These are not just sentimental notions. They are the physical manifestations of my family legacy, tangible reminders of who we are and where we come from. The surrounding landscape has changed considerably over the years. What was once open countryside dotted with other family farms has gradually transformed as developers purchased adjacent properties. 5 years ago, the Willow Creek Estates subdivision broke ground about a half-mile from my eastern boundary. I watched with mixed feelings as modern homes with manicured lawns replaced what had once been the Johnson family dairy operation. To their credit, most of the new residents seemed to appreciate having a working ranch nearby. Families would often stop along the road to watch the cattle graze or wave hello when I rode the fence line on horseback. Some even mentioned how the ranch added rustic charm and authentic character to their community. I did not mind their presence either. Change is inevitable, and they seemed respectful of the boundaries between our different ways of life. Last Thursday started like any other spring morning. The sun was just clearing the hills as I finished my first cup of coffee on the porch. I spotted the mail carrier turning up my long gravel driveway, unusual for so early in the day. She handed me a certified letter requiring my signature, offered a sympathetic smile, and left without our usual friendly chat. The official envelope bore the embossed logo of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. I stood there holding the unopened letter, watching dust trail behind the mail truck as an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. In 15 years of running this ranch, I had never received a certified letter from neighbors. Inside, I found a formal notice printed on heavy cardstock. As my eyes scanned the document, confusion gave way to disbelief, then anger. According to this letter, the HOA was asserting that portions of my eastern pastures constituted community land based on some obscure boundary dispute from decades earlier. They requested my presence at their next board meeting to discuss integration of these areas into the community plan. My coffee grew cold on the porch railing as I read the letter again and again, trying to make sense of their claim. How could anyone possibly think they had rights to land that had been in my family for 3 generations? The ranch had always ended at the creek that served as a natural boundary. Looking out across my pastures, I could not imagine anyone having the audacity to claim what so clearly belonged to me. Yet there it was in black and white, the first shot fired in what would become a battle for everything I held dear. The morning after receiving the letter, I spread the documents across my kitchen table like a general examining battle maps. The HOA letter included several attachments, historical survey documents, satellite imagery with superimposed boundary lines, and citations of county easement regulations. Their claims centered on approximately 30 acres of my eastern pastures, some of my most productive grazing land that bordered their development. According to their interpretation, these acres fell under something called a historical community access designation, dating back to the 1950s. I pulled out my own property deeds and surveys, yellowed with age but meticulously preserved. Nothing in my documentation suggested any such designation or easement. The property lines had been clearly established when my grandfather purchased the land and remained unchanged through two subsequent generations. This discrepancy troubled me deeply. Either someone was grossly mistaken or deliberately misrepresenting facts. Seeking answers, I drove into town to visit Martha Jensen, who had lived in the area for over 70 years. If anyone would know about historical land disputes, it would be Martha. Her small house on Maple Street was a repository of local history and gossip. The HOA, you say? Martha shook her head as she poured me a cup of tea. That group changed completely about 6 months ago. The original board members were mostly retired folks who just wanted to maintain property values. But then Victoria Harrington moved in from Chicago and staged what folks are calling a suburban coup. Got herself elected president and brought in all new board members. What do you know about Harrington? I asked, accepting the steaming mug. Martha frowned. Career corporate type, talks constantly about her vision for transforming Willow Creek into a premier community. Rumor has it she has political ambitions. County commissioner, maybe even state representative eventually. This information added a new dimension to my concerns. This was not just about land. It was about someone with ambition using my property as a stepping stone to further their own agenda. I thanked Martha and headed to the community center where the HOA meeting was scheduled for that evening. The Willow Creek Estates Community Center was a modern building with large windows and sleek furniture, nothing like the functional, weathered structures on my ranch. I felt immediately out of place in my work jeans and boots among the business casual attire of the board members. 7 people sat at an elevated table at the front of the room, name placards identifying each one. In the center sat Victoria Harrington, HOA president, her posture perfect and her expression coolly professional. "Mr. Mitchell, thank you for joining us," Victoria said as I took a seat in the front row. Her voice carried the polished tone of someone accustomed to corporate presentations. "We are discussing the community expansion plans, which directly involve portions of your adjacent property." "Those portions are not adjacent. They are my property," I stated firmly. "My family has owned and worked that land for generations." Victoria smiled without warmth. "Historical records can be complicated. Our research indicates that the 30 acres in question were subject to a community access agreement dating back to 1952. We believe this agreement effectively places those acres under community jurisdiction." "I have never seen any documentation of such an agreement," I responded, keeping my voice level despite my rising frustration. "And even if such an agreement existed, which I doubt, it would not transfer ownership rights to your HOA. Board member Gerald Thompson, a thin man with rimless glasses, interjected. "The legal term is prescriptive easement through historical use. The community has rights to land that has been traditionally accessed by local residents." "No one has accessed that land except my family and our employees for decades," I countered. "It is active pasture land for cattle grazing." Victoria maintained her professional demeanor, but I detected a flash of annoyance. "Mr. Mitchell, times change. Communities evolve. What might have been appropriate land use 50 years ago may not serve the greater good today. We are offering to work with you on this transition rather than pursuing more formal legal channels. The implied threat was not subtle. As the meeting continued, Victoria outlined their vision for my land: tennis courts, a community garden, walking paths, and a small pavilion. She referred to these as amenities that would enhance property values for everyone in the area. When the meeting concluded, I lingered behind, examining a display board they had neglected to cover. There, in full-color renderings, were architectural plans for my eastern pastures. Someone had already invested considerable time and money designing facilities on land they did not own. The arrogance was breathtaking. Standing in my field at sunset that evening, I could visualize where their planned tennis courts would replace grassland where my cattle now grazed. The realization struck me with physical force. These people truly believed they could simply redraw boundaries that had stood for generations and take what was mine. The line between their manicured community and my working ranch was about to become a battleground, and I had not even begun to fight. The offices of Granger and Associates occupied the second floor of the only three-story building in our county seat. James Granger had handled my family legal matters for 20 years, so he was my first stop after the HOA meeting. His leather chair creaked as he leaned back, reviewing the documents I had brought. "This is troubling, to say the least," James said finally, removing his reading glasses. "Their claim has just enough historical ambiguity to create problems. The original survey from the 1930s used the creek as a boundary marker, but the creek has shifted slightly over decades. And there was indeed a period in the 1950s when the county considered an easement for a potential access road, though it was never developed. So they have no legitimate claim," I asserted. James grimaced. "In a perfect world, no, but property law is rarely straightforward. Litigation would likely take years and cost tens of thousands of dollars. Even with a strong case, the outcome is not guaranteed." I left his office with a heavy heart and heavier thoughts. Legal battles were not something my ranch budget could withstand, especially protracted ones. I would need to find another approach. 3 days later, the first violation notice arrived in my mailbox: noncompliance with community aesthetic standards. It read, citing my eastern fence line as improperly maintained and visually inconsistent with community specifications. The fine was $500, with an additional $100 accruing each week until the violation was remedied. I called the number listed and reached Victoria Harrington directly. "My property is a working ranch," I explained, controlling my tone. "It is not subject to your HOA regulations." "The portions that fall within community boundaries certainly are," she replied smoothly. "And our attorneys confirm that the eastern 30 acres do indeed fall within those boundaries. We are simply enforcing existing regulations." The violation notices continued, each more absurd than the last. Unauthorized agricultural activity in residential zone, improper waste management procedures, unapproved livestock housing structures. The fines mounted with each notice, now totaling over $2,000. Then came the unannounced visits. I would look up from repairing equipment to find HOA board members walking my property with clipboards and measuring devices. They photographed my barns, my equipment sheds, even my cattle. When I confronted them, they cited inspection rights under HOA bylaws. Each encounter left me seething with a combination of violation and powerlessness. One evening at the local diner, I attempted to reason with board member Sarah Collins, who I recognized as a more moderate voice during meetings. "Sarah, you have to understand what this land means to my family," I began. She glanced around nervously before responding in a low voice. I understand more than you know, but Victoria has convinced the board this is for the greater good of the community. The amenities she is planning would significantly increase property values. At the expense of my livelihood, I pointed out. Sarah would not meet my eyes. The decision has essentially been made. Victoria has already discussed funding options with contractors. The board votes next week, but it is just a formality. My attempts to engage other board members met with similar avoidance or rehearsed responses. They had circled their wagons, committed to their course of action regardless of its impact on me. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place through pure chance. While retrieving permit records at the county administration building, I overheard a clerk mention Victoria Harrington's name. She was just here discussing campaign logistics, the clerk told her colleague. Apparently, her community improvement project is the centerpiece of her county commissioner campaign. She has donors coming to tour the site next month. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. My land was not just a community project. It was Victoria's political launching pad. My family heritage, my livelihood, my very connection to this place were merely obstacles to her ambition. That evening, I stood at my property line watching HOA members conducting yet another inspection. They moved across my pastures with the entitlement of conquerors, pointing and making notes, planning how they would transform my working ranch into suburban amenities. My hands clenched into fists as I realized this was no longer about land boundaries. This was about the right to determine my own destiny against those who would simply take what they wanted because they could. As the sun set behind me, I knew with absolute certainty that the time for polite negotiations had passed. Tuesday arrived with a steady spring rain that turned my gravel driveway into a muddy track. I was repairing a leak in the barn roof when I noticed the vehicles. 3 white SUVs with the Willow Creek Estates logo emblazoned on their doors pulled up to my eastern pasture fence line. Through the rain, I watched as 6 people emerged wearing rain jackets and boots, carrying large bags. Initially, I thought this was yet another inspection, irritating but ultimately harmless. Then I saw them begin to hammer stakes into my pasture ground. Bright orange survey flags topped each stake, creating a visible line that cut directly through my best grazing land. They were physically marking what they claimed as theirs. I trudged through the mud and rain to confront them, water streaming from the brim of my hat. "What do you think you are doing on my property?" I demanded. Victoria Harrington turned, seemingly unsurprised by my appearance. She gestured to a man beside her holding a tablet protected from the rain by a plastic cover. "Our surveyor has confirmed the proper boundary lines according to the historical records. We are simply marking what the community plan has designated as shared green space." "This is private property," I said, my voice low and dangerous even to my own ears. "You are trespassing, and those stakes are interfering with my livestock operation." Victoria sighed as if dealing with a difficult child. "Mr. Mitchell, we have provided you with all the relevant documentation. The HOA has legal standing here. These markers will help everyone understand the proper boundaries moving forward. Our development team begins assessment next week." Development team. The words hit me like a physical blow. Of course, the community amenities need proper planning before construction can begin. Victoria turned away, clearly considering the conversation finished. I watched them complete their work, methodically marking off acres of my land with their plastic flags and metal stakes. The rain intensified, but they continued until the entire disputed area was staked and flagged. When they finally departed, Orange markers dotted my pasture like an invasive species. That evening, I methodically removed every stake and flag, placing them in my wheelbarrow. The act was cathartic. Each stake pulled from the earth a small victory against their audacity. I deposited the entire collection at the entrance to the Willow Creek Estates, arranged neatly in rows like some bizarre art installation. Their response arrived by courier the next morning. A cease and desist letter threatening legal action for willful destruction and removal of survey markers, and obstruction of community development procedures. The letter further stated that any continued interference would result in a lien being placed against my property. Within days, I began noticing the ripple effects of their campaign. Unfamiliar cars drove slowly past my ranch, occupants pointing and staring. At the feed store, conversations halted when I entered, resuming in hushed tones once I moved away. My neighbor Tom finally explained what was happening. "They are telling everyone your operation is unsafe," Tom said uncomfortably. "Something about improper waste management contaminating groundwater. And there are rumors about outdated electrical systems creating fire hazards that could spread to surrounding properties." The rumors were completely fabricated, designed to isolate me from community support and justify their takeover. The strategy was as effective as it was dishonest. People who had known me for years now regarded me with uncertainty, their friendly waves becoming hesitant nods. The situation escalated dramatically when I discovered multiple gates left open along my eastern fence line. This was not mere harassment but dangerous interference with my operation. Cattle that wandered onto roadways could cause accidents, resulting in injuries or deaths for which I would be liable. I spent an entire day securing my livestock and repairing gates, only to find more open the following morning. This time, 3 of my animals had wandered out. 2 were grazing harmlessly along the roadside, but my prized breeding bull Ferdinand was nowhere to be seen. The search began before dawn. I took my truck along the county roads while 2 ranch hands checked the wooded areas. Hours passed with no sign of him. As fog rolled in with the approaching evening, desperation crept into my search. Ferdinand represented not just significant financial investment but the future of my herd's genetic line. The call came just after sunset. A motorist had spotted a large bull in a drainage ditch about a mile from my property. I found Ferdinand struggling to stand, his massive frame hindered by an injured leg. Barbed wire from a fence he had crashed through had left deep lacerations along his flank. The proud animal that had always carried himself with such dignity now looked at me with confused, pain-filled eyes. Working by flashlight, I freed him from the remaining wire and examined his injuries. The leg did not appear broken, but the cuts would require antibiotics and careful monitoring. I managed to coax him into my trailer and return him to the safety of the barn. As I tended his wounds, something fundamental shifted within me. The calculated harassment, the fraudulent claims, the boundary disputes, these were attacks on property and principle that I could endure. But causing harm to an innocent animal under my care crossed a line I could not ignore. That night, surrounded by veterinary supplies and reference books illuminated by a single lamp, I researched property law until the pages blurred before my exhausted eyes. In a footnote of an agricultural code citation, I found what I had been looking for: special protections for designated agricultural operations, including specific provisions for livestock safety measures. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I had been given by another rancher facing development pressure. "Henderson Specialized Fencing," a gruff voice answered. "I need a consultation about electric fencing for livestock protection," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in days. "As soon as possible." My dining room transformed into a command center over the next week. Documents covered every surface. Land surveys dating back to the original purchase, agricultural code publications, county ordinances, historical aerial photographs, and genealogical records establishing my family connection to the property. I was no longer reacting to their moves. I was developing my own strategy. The specialist from Henderson Fencing arrived Monday morning, a weathered man named Ray whose family had been in the business for 4 generations. He listened carefully as I explained the situation, nodding occasionally and taking measurements of the disputed boundary. "You are not the first agricultural operation to face this kind of encroachment," Ray said, marking notations on a property map. "Developers and HOAs have been pushing these tactics for years, but they often overlook agricultural protection statutes." I showed him the provisions I had discovered in my research. Ray confirmed my interpretation. Agricultural operations have special protections regarding security measures for livestock. Electric fencing is explicitly permitted when properly installed and marked. No HOA regulation can override these state protections. This revelation led me to consult with Anthony Prescott, an attorney specializing in agricultural law rather than general practice. During our first meeting, his assessment was direct and encouraging. "Your property has maintained continuous agricultural use for over 80 years, Anthony explained. "This grants you certain rights under state law that supersede local or private regulations. The HOA claims are built on deliberately misinterpreted historical records and would not likely withstand proper legal scrutiny." "Then why did my regular attorney seem so uncertain?" I asked. "General practitioners often do not specialize in agricultural law," Anthony replied. "These cases require specific expertise, and the HOA is counting on your lack of resources to fight a prolonged legal battle. Most people would simply concede rather than face years of litigation." Anthony confirmed that my planned approach was legally sound. Electric fencing for livestock protection is explicitly protected. You must follow proper installation protocols and warning signage requirements, but you have every right to secure your property and protect your animals. With legal confirmation in hand, I moved to the next phase, establishing definitive proof of my property boundaries. I hired Jackson Surveying, a firm specializing in agricultural properties, to conduct a comprehensive survey using both historical records and modern GPS technology. The results validated what I had always known. The creek that served as my eastern boundary had shifted only marginally over decades, and the original property deed clearly defined the boundary as following the creek's path. The HOA's claim of historical community access was based on a misrepresentation of a never-implemented county planning document from 1952. Armed with this documentation, I began the implementation phase. The materials for the electric fencing arrived on flatbed trucks, high-quality cedar posts, specialized insulators, weather-resistant wire, solar-powered energizers, and large warning signs printed in multiple languages. I selected a system that would deliver a deterrent shock without causing serious harm, effective but humane. The installation process became a form of meditation. Each post hole dug represented reclaiming what was mine. Each post set in concrete symbolized my determination to stand firm. The physical labor was exhausting but deeply satisfying. I worked methodically from sunrise to sunset, following the precise boundary line established by the new survey. The fence took shape day by day. We installed posts at 8-foot intervals along the entire disputed boundary, each one carefully aligned and level. The wiring required precision, proper tension, secure connections, and consistent height. Warning signs were placed every 50 feet, clearly visible from all approaches. The solar charging stations were positioned for maximum sun exposure, with battery backups for cloudy days. As I worked, neighbors occasionally slowed their vehicles to watch. Some frowned in disapproval, clearly influenced by the HOA's campaign. Others nodded in quiet support, recognizing a stand against overreach when they saw it. I acknowledged them all with the same polite nod, neither seeking approval nor avoiding confrontation. On the final day of installation, I tested the system thoroughly. A voltage meter confirmed appropriate levels, enough to deliver a memorable but safe deterrent. The warning signs gleamed in the afternoon sun, impossible to miss or ignore. The boundary was now unmistakably marked, legally established and properly secured. Standing back to survey the completed project, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The fence represented more than just a physical barrier. It was a statement of principle, a line drawn not just on land, but against the entitlement that assumed money and influence could simply take what belonged to others. The gleaming wire caught the sunlight as it traced the true boundary of my property, a perfect reflection of where their authority ended and mine continued. That evening, I walked the fence line one final time, checking connections and testing the voltage at various points. Ferdinand watched from the nearby pasture, his wounds healing well. The bull seemed to understand that his territory was now properly defended. As the sun set behind us, I felt prepared for the inevitable confrontation. They had underestimated my resolve, my resources, and my rights. Their next move would be met with the full force of legal protection and personal determination. I did not have to wait long. As I returned to the house, I noticed several vehicles turning into my driveway. Leading the procession was Victoria Harrington's white SUV, followed by what appeared to be the entire HOA board. Their expressions through the windshields promised that the real battle was about to begin. The caravan of luxury vehicles came to a stop in my gravel driveway, dust settling around them in the golden afternoon light. Victoria Harrington emerged first, designer sunglasses doing little to hide her obvious fury. The other board members followed, some looking uncomfortable, others matching her indignation. Several had phones out, recording what they clearly anticipated would be a confrontation worthy of documentation. I remained on my porch, deliberately casual, mug of coffee in hand. Let them come to me, I thought. This is my land, my home, my stand. Victoria marched forward, heels inappropriate for ranch gravel, her stride stiff with barely contained rage. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing toward the fence. "You have installed an electric fence without approval. This is dangerous, non-compliant, and absolutely unacceptable." I took a slow sip of coffee before responding. That fence is fully compliant with state agricultural regulations. It protects my livestock from further harm and clearly marks the legal boundary of my property as established by certified survey. Victoria's face flushed. "Your interpretation of boundaries is irrelevant. The HOA has established community jurisdiction over those acres. You will remove this fence immediately, or we will pursue every legal remedy available. Perhaps we should discuss this at the emergency meeting you have undoubtedly already planned," I suggested calmly. 7 o'clock at the community center, correct?" Her momentary surprise confirmed my assumption. Of course, there would be an emergency meeting. Victoria's political aspirations required swift and public response to any challenge. "Yes," she recovered quickly. "The board will address this violation formally. I suggest you bring whatever legal representation you can afford. You will need it." As they departed, I noticed board member Sarah Collins lingering behind. Once the others were out of earshot, she approached hesitantly. "You should know," she said quietly. "Victoria has invited county officials and potential campaign donors to tonight's meeting. She is framing this as her first major test of leadership. There is a lot at stake for her." I nodded my thanks for this information. There is a lot at stake for all of us. The Willow Creek Estates Community Center was filled beyond capacity that evening. Residents occupied every seat, with more standing along the walls. I recognized not just HOA members but people from throughout the county, drawn by curiosity about the conflict that had become local gossip. At the front of the room, Victoria sat centered at the board table, flanked by other members, and a man I assumed was their attorney. I entered carrying a single file folder and a small cardboard tube containing rolled documents. Taking a seat in the front row, I noticed several people in business attire who appeared out of place among the residents. Campaign donors, likely, there to witness Victoria's leadership in action. Victoria called the meeting to order with practiced authority. "We are addressing an urgent safety and compliance issue. Mr. Mitchell has installed an unauthorized electric fence bordering community property, creating a significant hazard to residents and directly violating HOA regulations." She motioned to the board attorney, who stood with pompous gravity. "This installation constitutes multiple violations of community standards and potentially violated county permitting requirements. The HOA is prepared to seek immediate injunctive relief, requiring removal of this hazardous structure." Several board members nodded in agreement. Victoria then turned to me with theatrical formality. "Mr. Mitchell, do you have any statement before the board votes on enforcement action?" "I do," I replied, rising slowly. Rather than approaching the podium, I remained where everyone could see me. "I would like to address several factual matters that appear to have been misrepresented." I opened my folder and removed the first document. This is the official survey completed last week by Jackson Surveying, certified by the state and registered with the county. It conclusively establishes the boundary line exactly where my fence now stands. The attorney attempted to interrupt, but I continued steadily. "This second document is the Agricultural Protection Statute, Section 44.3, which explicitly permits electric fencing for livestock protection when properly installed and marked with warning signs, which mine is." I removed more papers as I spoke. "This is documentation of the injury to my livestock caused by trespass after HOA representatives deliberately left gates open. This is the veterinary report detailing treatment required. And this is confirmation that my fence installation meets all safety and regulatory requirements." Victoria attempted to reclaim control. "These documents are not relevant to HOA regulations, which clearly prohibit." "They are entirely relevant," I interrupted firmly, "because HOA regulations do not apply to my property. The land you have attempted to claim has been in continuous agricultural use for 83 years, protected by state statutes that supersede local or private governance." I unrolled the documents from the cardboard tube. These are the original property deeds and county records dating to 1937, along with aerial surveys from each decade since, all confirming the consistent boundary line. I turned to face the audience rather than the board. But the most revealing document is this one. I held up a printed email, a communication between Ms. Harrington and potential campaign donors, describing how she would secure premium community land for development as a showcase project to launch her political career. Murmurs spread through the audience. Victoria's expression hardened as she realized I had uncovered her true motivation. The final document, I continued, is perhaps the most important. I projected an image onto the wall showing the original Willow Creek Estates development plan. This is the approved plan filed with the county 5 years ago, showing the development boundary stopping precisely at the creek line, exactly where my fence now stands. I placed a second image beside it. And this is the modified plan Ms. Harrington has been circulating to potential donors, showing tennis courts and amenities built on my property, land that she has no legal right to claim or develop. The room erupted in conversation. I noticed several of Victoria's potential donors exchanging troubled glances. Community members leaned toward each other, pointing at the conflicting plans projected on the wall. Ms. Harrington has deliberately misrepresented property boundaries to further personal political ambitions, I stated, my voice carrying clearly through the commotion. She has fabricated claims, encouraged trespass that resulted in harm to livestock, spread false rumors about safety conditions, and attempted to appropriate private property through intimidation and procedural manipulation. Victoria slammed her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. These accusations are baseless. We are following established HOA protocols for community expansion. An older resident stood from the audience. I was on the original development committee 5 years ago. Our approved plan never included that land. The creek was always the boundary. Another resident joined in. We were told this was about community green space. No one mentioned it was for a political campaign. The mood in the room had shifted palpably. Board member Sarah Collins cleared her throat and spoke into her microphone. I move that we suspend any action regarding the fence pending full review of these documents. The motion received an immediate second from another board member, clearly sensing the changing winds. Victoria attempted to object, but she was overruled as additional board members supported the motion. As the meeting concluded, residents approached me with handshakes and questions. Some apologized for believing the rumors. Others expressed outrage at the attempted land grab. Victoria and her closest allies huddled in tense conversation, their authority visibly diminished. The potential donors were already heading for the exits, their checkbooks remaining closed. I gathered my documents and prepared to leave, nodding respectfully to those who had finally recognized the truth. This was not the end of the conflict, but the battlefield had shifted decisively. The community had glimpsed the reality behind Victoria's carefully constructed narrative, and no amount of procedural maneuvering could restore her credibility. I returned to my ranch that night knowing that while the war was not over, the most important battle had been won, the battle for truth. The county courthouse stands as one of the oldest buildings in our community, its limestone facade weathered by decades of sun and rain. 1 month after the confrontational HOA meeting, I found myself seated in courtroom 3 as Victoria Harrington and the HOA made their last desperate attempt to claim my land. Their attorney presented arguments about historical easements and community development needs. His confidence noticeably diminished as the judge repeatedly referenced the documentation I had provided. Judge Eleanor Simmons, who had presided over local property disputes for 20 years, reviewed the agricultural protection statutes with particular attention. These provisions are quite clear, she observed. Land in continuous agricultural use maintains specific protections and rights regardless of surrounding development. The HOA attorney shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, the Community Development Plan has already allocated funds for the amenities planned for this area. Allocating funds for development on land you do not own is not a legal basis for claiming that land, Judge Simmons replied dryly. The survey evidence and historical documentation clearly establish the property boundaries as marked by Mr. Mitchell's fence. Her ruling came swiftly and decisively. The HOA had no legal claim to any portion of my ranch. My electric fence was properly installed according to agricultural regulations and could remain in place. Furthermore, all HOA fines and violation notices were invalidated, and the HOA was prohibited from further interference with my agricultural operations. Victoria refused to meet my eyes as she exited the courthouse, her political aspirations visibly diminished. The local newspaper ran a front-page story the following day. Judge rejects HOA land grab attempt. The article detailed Victoria's campaign connections and the misrepresentations she had made to both residents and potential donors. Her credibility was irreparably damaged. The ripple effects spread quickly through the community. Residents who had previously accepted HOA restrictions without question began challenging overreaching policies. At the next regular meeting, multiple homeowners presented documentation of arbitrary enforcement and questioned the necessity of numerous regulations. Why can we not plant vegetable gardens in our front yards?